Longships were a type of ship invented and used by the Norsemen for trade, commerce, exploration, and warfare during the Viking Age. The longship's design evolved over many centuries, beginning in the Stone Age with the invention of the umiak and continuing up until the 6th century with clinker-built ships like Nydam and Kvalsund. The longship appeared in its complete form between the 9th and 13th centuries. The character and appearance of these ships have been reflected in Scandinavian boat-building traditions until today. The particular skills and methods employed in making longships are still used worldwide, often with modern adaptations. They were all made out of wood, with cloth sails, and had numerous details and carvings on the hull. The longships were characterized as a graceful, long, narrow and light wooden boat with a shallow draft hull designed for speed. The ship's shallow draft allowed navigation in waters only 1 meter deep and permitted random beach landings, while its light weight enabled it to be carried over portages or used bottoms up for shelter in camps. Longships were also double-ended, the symmetrical bow and stern allowing the ship to reverse direction quickly without a turnaround. The strait proved particularly useful at northern latitudes, where icebergs and sea ice posed hazards to navigation. Longships were fitted with oars along almost the entire length of the boat itself. Later versions had a rectangular sail on a single mast, which was used to replace or augment the effort of the rowers, particularly during long journeys. The average speed of Viking ships varied from ship to ship, but lay in the range of 5 to 10 knots, and the maximum speed of a longship under favorable conditions was around 15 knots. Longships were the epitome of naval power in the time and were highly valued possessions. They were often commonly owned by coastal farmers and commissioned by kings in times of conflict, in order to quickly assemble a large and powerful naval force. While longships were used by the Norse in warfare, they were mostly used for troop transports, not warships. In the 10th century, longships would sometimes be tied together in offshore battles to form a steady platform for infantry warfare. During the 9th century peak of the Viking expansion, large fleets set out to attack the degrading Frankish Empire by attacking up navigable rivers such as the Seine. Rouen was sacked in 841, the year after the death of Louis the Pious, son of Charlemagne. Quentavich, near modern Etaples, was attacked in 842, and 600 Danish ships attacked Hamburg in 845. In the same year, 129 ships returned to attack up the Seine. They were called dragon ships by enemies such as the English because they had a dragon-shaped bow. The Norse had a strong sense of naval architecture, and during the early medieval period they were advanced for the time. Types of longships. Longships can be classified into a number of different types, depending on size, construction details, and prestige. The most common way to classify longships is by the number of rowing positions on board. Carvey, the carvey of the smallest vessel that is considered a longship. According to the 10th century gulating law, a ship with 13 rowing benches is the smallest ship suitable for military use. A ship with between 6 and 16 benches would be classified as a carvey. These ships were considered to be general-purpose ships, mainly used for fishing and trade, but occasionally were commissioned for military use. While most longships held a length-to-width ratio of 7:1, the carvey ships were closer to 4.51. The Gokstad ship is a famous carvey ship, built around the end of the 9th century, excavated in 1880 by Nikolai Nikolaisen. It was approximately 23 meters long with 16 rowing positions. The SNEKKJ, meaning thin and projecting, was typically the smallest longship used in warfare and was classified as a ship with at least 20 rowing bench. A typical snekker might have a length of 17 meters, a width of 2.5 meters, and a draft of only 0.5 meters. It would carry a crew of around 41 men. Snekkers were one of the most common types of ship. According to Viking lore, Canute the Great used 1,200 in Norway in 1028. The Norwegian snekkers, designed for deep fjords and Atlantic weather, typically had more draft than the Danish model designed for low coasts and beaches. Snekkers were so light that they had no need of ports, they could simply be beached, and potentially even carried across a portage. The snekkers continued to evolve after the end of the Viking Age, with later Norwegian examples becoming larger and heavier than Viking Age ships. They are still being used in Norway, and are now called snekker, skade, meaning that which cuts through water. Ships were larger warships, consisting of more than 30 rowing bench. Ships of this classification are some of the largest longships ever discovered. A group of these ships were discovered by Danish archaeologists in Roskilde during development in the harbour area in 1962 and 1996–97. The ship, discovered in 1962, Scandinavian, is an oak-built skate longship. It is believed to have been built in the Dublin area around 1042. Scandinavian could carry a crew of some 70 to 80 and measures just less than 30 meters in length. In 1996–97, archaeologists discovered the remains of another ship in the harbour. This ship, called the Roskilde 6, at 37 meters is the longest Viking ship ever discovered and has been dated to around 1025. Scandinavian was replicated as Sea Stallion from Glendale at Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde and launched in 2004. In 2012, a 35 meters long skate longship known as Dragon Harald Fairhair was launched in Norway. It was built from scratch by experts, using original Viking and experimental archaeological methods. Drekar are known from historical sources, such as the 13th century Gong Uralf saga. Here, the ships are described as elegant and ornately decorated, and used by those who went raiding and plundering. These ships were likely skades that differed only in the carvings of menacing beasts, such as dragons and snakes, carried on the prow of the ship. These carvings allegedly protected the ship and crew, and warded off the terrible sea monsters of Norse mythology. It is however likely that the carvings, like those on the Oseberg ship, might have had a ritual purpose, or that the purported effect was to frighten enemies and townspeople. No true dragon ship, as defined by the sagas, has been found by archaeological excavation. Construction. The first longships can trace their origin back to between 500 and 300 BC, when the Danish Hjort spring boat was built. It was fastened with cord, not nailed, and paddled, not rowed. It had rounded cross-sections and, although 20 meters long, was only 2 meters wide. The rounded sections gave maximum displacement for the lowest wetted surface area, similar to a modern narrow rowing skiff, so were very fast but had little carrying capacity. The shape suggests mainly river use. Unlike later boats, it had a low bow and stern. A distinctive feature is the two-prong cutaway bow section. The first true longship that was rowed was the Nydam ship, built in Denmark around 350 AD. It also had very rounded underwater sections but had more pronounced flare in the topsides, giving it more stability, as well as keeping more water out of the boat at speed or in waves. It had no sail. It was of lap-strake construction fastened with iron nails. The bow and stern had slight elevation. The keel was a flattened plank about twice as thick as a normal strake plank, but still not strong enough to withstand the downwards thrust of a mast. The Sutton Hoo longship, sometimes referred to as the ghost ship of the Wafflings, is about 27 meters times 4.5 meters maximum beam and built about 625 AD. It is associated with the Saxons. The ship was crushed by the weight of soil when buried, but most details have been reconstructed. The ship was similar in hull section to the Nydam ship with flared topsides. Compared to later longships, the oak planks are wide, about 250 mm, including laps with less taper at bow and stern. Planks were 25 mm thick. The 26 heavy frames are spaced at 850 mm in the center. Each frame tapers from the turn of the bilge to the inle. This suggests that knees were used to brace the upper 2 or 3 topside planks, but appear to have rotted away. The hull had a distinctive leaf shape, with the bow sections much narrower than the stern quarters. There were 9 wide planks per side. The ship had a light keel plank but pronounced stem and stern deadwood. The reconstruction suggests the stern was much lower than the bow. It had steering oar to starboard braced by an extra frame. The raised prow extended about 3.7 meters above the keel, and the hull was estimated to draw 750 millimeters when lightly laden. Between each futtock the planks were lapped in normal clinker style and fastened with 6 iron rivets per plank. There is no evidence of a mast, sail, or strengthening of the keel amidships, but a half-sized replica, the SOE Wildfing, sailed very well with a modest sail area. Sails started to be used from possibly the 8th century. The earliest had either plaited a checkered pattern, with narrow strips sewn together. About 700 AD the Kvalsund ship was built. It is the first with a true keel. Its cross-sectional shape was flatter on the bottom with less flare to the topsides. This shape is far more stable and able to handle rougher seas. It had the high prow of the later longships. After several centuries of evolution, the fully developed longship emerged sometime in the middle of the 9th century. Its long, graceful, menacing head figure carved in the stern, such as the Oseberg ship, echoed the designs of its predecessors. The mast was now square in section and located toward the middle of the ship, and could be lowered and raised. The hull's sides were fastened together to allow it to flex with the waves, combining lightness and ease of handling on land. The ships were large enough to carry cargo and passengers on long ocean voyages, but still maintain speed and agility, making the longship a versatile warship and cargo carrier. Keel, stems and hull. The Viking shipbuilders had no written diagrams as standard written design plan. The shipbuilder pictured the longship before its construction, based on previous builds, and the ship was then built from the keel up. The keel and stems were made first. The shape of the stem was based on segments of circles of varying sizes. The keel was an inverted T-shape to accept the garboard planks. In the longships the keel was made up of several sections spliced together and fastened with treenails. The next step was building the strakes. The lines of planks joined endwise from stern to stern. Nearly all longships were clinker-built, meaning that each hull plank overlapped the next. Each plank was hewn from an oak tree so that the finished plank was about 25 mm thick and tapered along each edge to a thickness of about 20 mm. The planks were radially hewn so that the grain is approximately at right angles to the surface of the plank. This provides maximum strength and even bend and an even rate of expansion and contraction in water. In modern terms this is called quarter-sawn timber and has has the least natural shrinkage of any cut section of wood. The plank above the turn of the bilge, the Megan Huff, was about 37 mm thick on very long ships, but narrower to take the strain of the cross beams. This was also the area subject to collisions. The planks overlapped by about 25 mm to 30 mm and were joined by iron rivets. Each overlap was stuffed with wool or animal hair, or sometimes hemp soaked in pine tar to ensure watertightness. At mid-length, where the planks are straight, the rivets are about 170 mm apart but work closer together as the planks sweep up to the curved bow and stern. There is considerable twist and bend in the end planks. This was achieved by using both thinner and narrower planks. In more sophisticated builds, forward planks were cut from natural curved trees called reaction wood. Planks were installed unseasoned or wet. Partly worked stems and sterns have been located in bogs. It has been suggested they were stored there over winter to stop the wood drying and cracking. The moisture in wet planks allowed the builder to force the planks into a more acute bend if need be. Once dry, it would stay in the forced position. At the bow and the stern, builders were able to create hollow sections, or compound bends, at the waterline, making the entry point very fine. In less sophisticated ships, short and nearly straight planks were used at the bow and stern. Where long timber was not available or the ship was very long, the planks were butt-joined, although overlapping scuff joints, fixed with nails, were also used. As the planks reached the desired height, the interior frame and cross beams were added. Frames were placed close together, which is an enduring feature of thin-planked ships, still used today on some lightweight wooden racing craft such as those designed by Bruce Farr. Viking boat builders used a spacing of about 850 mm. Part of the reason for this spacing was to achieve the correct distance between rowing stations and to create space for the chests used by Norse sailors as thwarts. The bottom futtocks next to the keel were made from lateral L-shaped crooks. The upper futtocks were usually not attached to the lower futtocks to allow some hull twist. The parts were held together with iron rivets, hammered in from the outside of the hull and fastened from the inside with a row. The surplus rivet was then cut off. A ship normally used about 700 kilograms of iron nails in a 18 meters long ship. In some ships, the gap between the lower uneven futtock and the lap straight planks was filled with spacer block about 200 millimeters long. In later ships, spruce stringers were fastened lengthwise to the futtocks roughly parallel to the keel. Long ships had about 5 rivets for each yard of plank. In many early ships, tree nails were used to fasten large timbers. First, a hole about 20 mm wide hole was drilled through 2 adjoining timbers. A wooden pegs inserted, which was split on a thin wedge inserted to expand the peg. Some tree nails have been found with traces of linseed oil, suggesting that tree nails were soaked before the pegs were inserted. When dried, the oil would act as a semi-waterproof weak filler glue. The long ship's narrow deep keel provided strength beneath the waterline. A typical size keel of a longer ship was 100 mm times 300 mm amidships, tapering in width at the bow and stern. Sometimes there was a false outer keel to take the wear while being dragged up a beach. These large timbers were shaped with both adze and broadacks. At the bow, the cut water was especially strong, as long boats sailed in ice-strewn water in spring. Hulls up to 560 centimeters wide gave stability, making the longship less likely to tip when sail. The greater beam provided more moment of leverage by placing the crew or any other mobile weight on the windward side. Ocean-going longships Longships had high topsides about 1 meter high to keep out water. High topsides were supported with knees with the long axes fastened to the top of the crossbeams. The hull was waterproofed with animal hair, wool, hemp, and moss drenched in pine tar. In the autumn the ships would be tarred and then left in a boathouse over the winter to allow time for the tar to dry. To keep the sea out, wooden discs were put into the oar holes. These could be shut from the inside when the oars were not in use. A drain plug hole about 25 mm was drilled in the garboard plank on one side to allow rainwater drainage. The oars did not use rowlocks or thole pins but square holes cut below the gunwale line. The holes were also used for belaying mooring lines and sail sheets. At the bow the forward upper futtock protruded about 400 mm above the shear line and was carved to retain anchor and mooring lines. Timber. Analysis of timber samples from Viking longboats shows that a variety of timbers were used, but there was strong preference for oak, which was associated with Odin in Viking mythology. Oak is a heavy, durable timber that can be easily worked by adze and axe when green. Generally large and prestigious ships were made from oak. Other timber used were ash, elm, pine, spruce and larch. Spruce is light and seems to have been more common in later designs for internal hull battens. Although it is used for spars in modern times, there is as yet no evidence the Vikings used spruce for masts. All timber was used unseasoned. The bark was removed by a bark spade. This consisted of a 1.2-metre long wooden handle with a T-crossbar at the upper end, fitted with a broad chisel-like cutting edge of iron. The cutting edge was 60 mm wide and 80 mm long, with a 120 mm long neck where the handle was inserted. It appears that in cold winters woodwork stopped and partly completed timber work was buried in mud to prevent it drying out. Timber was worked with iron adzes and axes. Most of the smoothing was done with a side axe. Other tools used in woodwork were hammers, wedges, draw knives, planes and saws. Iron saws were probably very rare. The Domesday Book in England records only 13 saws. Possibly these were pit saws, and it is uncertain if they were used in longship construction. Sail and mast. Even though no longship sail has been found, accounts verify that longships had square sails. Sails measured perhaps 11 meters to 12 meters across, and were made of rough wool cloth. Unlike in Nars, a longship sail was not stitched. The sail was held in place by the mast, which was up to 16 meters tall. Its base was about 250 mm times 180 mm. The mast was supported by a large wooden mast step called a curling that was semicircular in shape. The curling was made of oak, and about 700 mm wide and up to 6 meters long in the largest ships. It usually heavily tapered into a joint with the internal keelson, although keelsons were by no means universal. The curling lay across two strong frames that ran widthwise above the keel in the center of the boat. The curling also had a companion, the mast fish, a wooden timber above the curling just below deck height that provided extra help in keeping the mast erect. It was a large wooden bulk of timber about 3 meters long with a 1.4-metre long slot facing aft to accommodate the mast as it was raised. This acted as a mechanism to catch and secure the mast before the stays were secured. It was an early form of mast partner but was a line fore and aft. In later longships there is no mast fish. The mast partner is an athwartwise beam similar to more modern construction. Most masts were about half the length of the ship so that it did not project beyond the hull when unstepped. When lowered, the mast foot was kept in the base of the mast step and the top of the mast secured in a natural wooden crook about 1.5 to 2.5 meters high on the port side, so that it did not interfere interfere with steering on the starboard side. There is a suggestion that the rig was sometimes used in a lateen style with the top crossbar dipped at an angle to aid sailing to windward, i.e., the spar became the luff. There is little or no evidence to support this theory. No explanation is offered as to how this could be accomplished with a square sail, as the lower reefed portion of the sail would be very bulky and would prevent even an approximation of the laminar flow necessary for windward sailing. There is no evidence of any triangular sails in use. Masts were held erect by side stays and possibly fore and aft stays. Each side stay was fitted at its lower end with a 150 mm long toggle. There were no chain plates. The lower part of the side stay consisted of ropes looped under the end of a neave upper futtock which had a hole underneath. The lower part of the stay was about 500 to 800 mm long and attached to a combined flat wooden turn block and multi-V-jam cleat called an angel. About 4 turns of rope went between the angel and the toggle to give the mechanical advantage to tighten the side stays. At each turn, the V-shape at the bottom of the angel's wings jammed the stay, preventing slippage and movement. Rudder. Early longboats used some form of steering oar, but by the 10th century the side rudder was well established. It consisted of a length of timber about 2.4 meters long. The upper section was rounded to a diameter of about 150 mm. The lower blade was about 1.8 meters times 0.4 meters. The steerboard on the Gokstad ship in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, Norway, is about 20 centimeters wide, completely flat inboard and with about of 7.6 centimeters maximum width at the center of the foil. The head of the rudder shaft had 2 square holes about 200 to 300 mm apart. When the rudder was in its normal position, the tiller was inserted in the upper hole so that the tiller faced athwartwise. The shaft was attached to the gunwale by a U-shaped joint. Near the stern, about halfway down the starboard top sides, was a rounded wooden block about 150 mm in diameter and 100 mm high, with a central hole for a rope. This corresponded to a hole in the midsection of the rudder blade. For the outside, the rope ran through the blade, through the round block and top sides, and was fastened inside the hull. The flexibility of the hemp rope allowed the blade to pivot. When beached or in shallow water, the tiller was moved to the lower hole. The blade rope was slackened and the rudder head pulled up so the rudder could operate in shallow waters. Modern facsimiles are reported to steer quite well but require a very large amount of physical effort compared to the modern fore and aft tiller. Anchors. Longships for the most part used 2 different kinds of anchors. The most common was a natural wood yoke formed from a tree branch. The weight was supplied by a stone passing laterally through the U of the yoke. The top of the yoke was closed by either a length of hardwood or a curved iron head, which kept the stone in place. One side of the head stuck out so it could dig into mud or sand. In the Ladby ship burial in Denmark, a unique iron anchor has been found, resembling the modern fisherman's anchor but without the crossbar. The crossbar may have rusted away. This anchor, made of Norwegian iron, has a long iron chain to which the hemp warp was attached. This construction has several advantages when anchored on deep waters or in rough seas. Shipbuilders Toolkien. At the height of Viking expansion into Dublin and Jorvik 875-954, the Longship reached a peak of development such as the Gokstad ship 890. Archaeological discoveries from this period at Coppegate, York, show the shipwright had a large range of sophisticated woodwork tools, as well as the heavy adze, broad axe, wooden mallets and wedges. The craftsman had steel tools such as anvils, files, snips, awls, augers, gouges, drawn knives including folding knives, chisels and small 300 mm long bow saws with antler handles. Edge tools were kept sharp with sharpening stones from Norway. One of the most sophisticated tools was a 25 mm diameter twist drill bit, perfect for drilling hole for tree nails. Simple mechanical polewood lathes were used to make cups and bowls. Replica longships. Since the discovery of the original longships in the 1800s, many boat builders have built many Viking ship replicas. However, most have not been able to resist the temptation to use more modern techniques and tools in the construction process. In 1892–93, a full-size near-replica of the Gokstad ship, the Viking, was built by the Norwegian Magnus Andersen in Bergen. It was used to sail the Atlantic. It had a deeper keel with 1.5 meters draft to stiffen the hull and a range of non-authentic triangular sails to help performance and big fenders on each gunwale filled with reindeer hair to give extra buoyancy in case of swamping. The skipper recorded that the keel bowed upwards as much as 20 mm and the gunwale flexed inwards as much as 150 mm in heavy seas. A half-size replica of the Sutton Hoo longship has been equipped with a substantial sail, despite the original having oar power only.